She went without air conditioning for 5 days, not by choice.
It's not good. We're dying of heat in here.
How her case could lead to action at the Capitol to make statewide changes. Congress passes a bill to boost semiconductor production, but critics call it a big corporate giveaway. We talked to a Texan who helped lead the bill, why he says it's worth the investment. With abortion blocked in Texas, some people are getting creative to help others get the procedure.
This is an option for patients who can't take time away from their family or time away from their lives and don't have the means to do that.
We look closer at one doctor's plans for a floating clinic and the legal and logistical challenges.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. A state lawmaker calls it a state of emergency. Renters going without air conditioning in this relentless heat, sometimes for several days. Our investigators have shared some of their stories, and we continue to get complaints. Now, as investigator Mike Rush explains, one state representative is vowing to change the law.
I go, "Are you mama's baby?" And she'll go, "I'm the bird person."
Whose own feathers are pretty ruffled right now. Thelma Reyes recently went days without air conditioning.
She was a baby when I got her.
Even her McCaul, Precious, was feeling it.
She was panting a lot. Her mouth was open and she's like, it's not good. We're dying of heat in here.
Reyes contacted management at her apartment, Miller Flats in East Austin.
Sent out a maintenance man and he was busy out on the apartment complex fixing 7 other air conditioners.
The problem persisted for 5 days, and Reyes documented the discomfort.
It was above 90.
She keeps images of her thermostat on her phone.
The temperature is still the same.
I needed proof.
Miller Flats is already on the Austin Code Department's repeat offender list, which happens when a property doesn't correct violations within an allotted time or has multiple violations or citations. Still, Reyes reported her experience to the city and kept calling management.
I called every day. So now what? What are we going to do? When are you going to do it?
We contacted Miller Flats several times by calling, emailing, and visiting the management office and are still waiting on a response. Reyes' experience is not an isolated case. The Austin Tenants Council tells me it gets on average 5 calls a day from area renters complaining of no AC, and this month around 60 complaints so far. Finally, with the help of her daughter, Reyes contacted her state representative, Cheryl Cole, and her air is back on now. While Cole says she's glad to help.
They shouldn't have to do that. They should not have to contact me to get something done.
What is the solution? What can be done on the state level to fix this?
Well, we'd have to file a bill. We don't have penalties for failure to abide by the property code provisions. There are Texas property code laws that show this is a violation of that, but there are no enforcement penalties.
Representative Cole says she plans to file legislation calling for penalties at the start of the next legislative session, which begins in January of next year, with the aim of protecting those like Reyes and so many other renters.
I want something done. People can't be like that. They have to have a heart.
Mike Rush, State of Texas.
Representative Cole told us her team is researching this legislation right now. They're trying to figure out the bill language and what the penalties should be under the legislation. Lawmakers can begin filing bills on November 14th, right after the election. The session starts on January 10th, and the deadline to file bills is March 10th. Lawmakers in Washington are wrapping up work before the August recess. On Thursday, they passed the CHIPS and Science Act, which is legislation aimed at boosting semiconductor production in the U.S. Those chips are essential to make things like phones, cars, and military weapons. But right now, relatively few are made in the United States, and some believe that threatens our national security. The bill includes nearly $53 billion in funding for chip manufacturing and research, also a 25% tax credit for companies that invest in domestic manufacturing. There's also $200 billion set aside for scientific research. Texas Congressman Michael McCaul was one of the original sponsors of the legislation. I had the chance to speak to the congressman about what the bill could mean for Texas and his response to critics of the legislation. Thank you for being with us, Congressman.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me.
So we first talked to you about this legislation when you introduced it more than 2 years ago. It's changed a bit since then. What does it do exactly?
Well, I introduced it 2 years ago after national security advisors from the prior administration told me that we have a shortage of semiconductor chips in this country. And everybody knows that if they tried to buy an automobile. But the problem is also in our most advanced national security weapons systems, we can't build those because we don't have the chips. So it's a vital national security asset. Not much has really changed in the bill since the final passage. It's gone through a lot of politics in 2 years, which is always, in my view, a bad thing. I think the original bill, for the most part, is there in terms of the grant program and the tax incentives to incentivize companies like Samsung to expand in the United States rather than go offshore, and to make these chips in the United States. This will result in trillions of dollars of investment in manufacturing jobs in the U.S., and Texas will be the real big beneficiary of the bill itself.
You know, we've already seen tech companies expanding here in Texas. How does this legislation affect that process? Who benefits there?
Well, you know, a lot of these tech companies like Samsung, like Micron, like Intel, Texas Instruments, and you know, around the Dallas area, have all been waiting for this legislation to pass. It's been held hostage for 2 years. I'm glad to say it passed yesterday. And they basically told us that if we did not get this done before our recess in August, they would have no alternative but to go offshore. And that would be to the European market or to Asia, where these incentives are being offered to them as well. So this was, if you will, really an emergency form of legislation to get it done now before they went offshore.
Critics of the bill say this is a case of taxpayers funding projects that many tech firms have already committed to. What do you say to people who worry this is corporate welfare?
Well, yeah, it's an odd argument made on both the far right and the far left. Tax incentives have been offered to tech companies for quite some time. Rick Perry did this quite a bit to get businesses in Texas. State and local governments do this all the time. You know, Ronald Reagan offered tax incentives. He got Semitech in Austin up and running with Admiral Emmett back in the day. And so it's really nothing new. But what makes it different in today's world is that when you have China investing $1 trillion in a digital economy, Europe taking our bill, offering these incentives, and Asia, if we want to truly be competitive, we got to be on that playing field. And without these incentives, they will go offshore because they have a duty to their shareholders.
We're seeing the effect of the chip shortage now. How soon will Americans see any benefit from this legislation?
I mean, right, if you go to buy a car, right, you see there aren't as many chips. You know, as I look at some of the weapons we're trying to put into Ukraine, like the Switchblade 600s, we don't have the chips. That's pretty scary when the United States of America has a shortage of weapon systems because of chips. And so, it takes about 1.5 years to build these fabrication plants, which is why it's so vitally important we passed it now and got it done now.
Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
You can see more from my interview with the congressman online now. We spoke more about the CHIPS bill and his take on the Brittany Griner release negotiations. Just scan the QR code on your screen. It will take you to our State of Texas page, where you can find a link to our full interview.
The state's trigger law to ban abortions takes effect in less than a month, and at least one doctor wants to take to the high seas to offer services to those seeking to terminate a pregnancy. We dig deeper into the legal and logistical challenges. A family member of the Uvalde shooter reveals new details about the gunman, how police video is highlighting a warning sign that may have been missed. And the challenger makes a move in the race for lieutenant governor, how Mike Collier's campaign is getting a boost in a new round of polling.